Hello there, everybody. Cert 3s, TVET, everybody. Welcome, drawing to the end of Reconciliation Week. It's been an unusual week, to say the least. We have events that one of my TVET students first mentioned this time last week about the incident in America where the police used excessive force and killed the fellow George Floyd, and that sparked a whole chain of events in America and flow over into Australia. So I'm going to show a few radio segments. I'm going to introduce them from this beautiful spot where I am, up in the Warumpi Mountains at Abbots Falls. I guess I found myself struggling a little bit this week, and this is a little bit of a favourite place for me. Place to get away and recharge the batteries. I guess it's about looking after my mental health to a degree. So coming up here, as I said, in the Warumpi, Abbots Falls. First segment I'm going to introduce is from ABC Radio. It's a PM program, and that draws some comments about not only the flow over effect from America but into Australia, but also was a little bit of footage of the young fellow, 16-year-old Aboriginal fellow in Sydney, and he was rather excessively treated by police. You may have seen that incident. Drawn in some footage on that. I guess this is a warning. It's fairly violent. The radio segment from PM commentates on that. I'll introduce a couple other segments as I get into this, but one segment will be from a local Indigenous fellow, Jacob Ridgway, and his take on reconciliation and where we're at this morning. And my final point, last week I introduced one of the songs that as an option, whatever song you go with is an option, and I chose the Warumpis, which happened to be not too far from where our guest Brett was speaking from last week. But Warumpi's song from 1980 was about getting out of jail in their Indigenous language, and not by, I guess, choice that I thought that, things were going to happen like this way, but there's certainly a flow-on effect in terms of the nexus or the link between that song and the experience of back in 1980 about getting out of jail. And a few of the segments mentioned the number of deaths in custody of Aboriginal people, which I guess is a thing that you can pick up from the Warumpi song about the number of deaths and the incarceration rate of Indigenous people in Australia still. 30 odd years since the Royal Commission, and I think the numbers quoted is around still 400 deaths in custody of Aboriginal people over that period since the completion of that inquiry into the deaths in custody, and putting into place strategies to reduce the number of people going into prison and the deaths. Only about a third of the recommendations for that inquiry have apparently been adopted. And we still have that high rate of incarceration and deaths in custody. And I guess in this first segment, the treatment of the young Aboriginal fellow, 16-year-old, is at the very least concerning. And I guess that idea of, are there better ways, are there better skills, where's the communication strategies? Being so heavy-handed, was that the way to build good relationships and have good outcomes for everybody involved?
Well, Indigenous Australians continue to decry the scenes in the United States, expressing solidarity with the experience of institutional racism and violence, noting that 432 Indigenous Australians have died in custody here since 2008. As they did so, yesterday an Aboriginal teenager was arrested in Sydney, pinned down by police officers. It was captured on video. Here is the confronting audio from that.
What was that? What? Oi! What the f***? Slammed him on the face. You just slammed him on his face. Oi! What the f*** is this? What the f*** is this? What? He's in pain, bro. I've never heard that.
Not only is this police conduct unacceptable, but it is downright dangerous.
The constable involved has been placed on restricted duties while the Professional Standards Command investigates.
I'm concerned that people will use this video, this footage, to create it into something that it's not. As I said, we're all well aware of what's happening overseas, but this is not the United States of America. We have very, very good relations with our local community.
The Redfern Legal Centre believes the video shows a common experience for Indigenous youth.
Aboriginal young people in particular are disproportionately policed not only in New South Wales but across Australia.
The video doesn't show the full interaction with the officers, but against the backdrop of race-related tensions with police in the US, lawyers say it's a reminder Australia isn't immune to alleged police brutality. Senior officers have met with local elders to keep them updated on the investigation. Jamie McKinnell, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, one officer is now on restricted duties while an internal review is conducted. Well, there's also a protest and vigil being held for George Floyd in central Sydney tonight. Well, the ABC's Stephen Stockwell is at that protest. And are they making any particular call for anything?
They're calling for an end to death in custody, which you might expect from a rally like this, better treatment of Indigenous Australians and people of colour generally, both here and in the United States.
Our reporter Stephen Stockwell in Sydney tonight.
In This Together is the theme for National Reconciliation Week. It finishes today, but because of our experience of the coronavirus pandemic, that theme, In This Together, has really taken on a bit of a new meaning since it was announced last year.
But what does the week and the theme mean for a local singer-songwriter and Warumpi Gamilaroi man, Jacob Ridgway? Morning, Jacob.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. What's it like to be a young Indigenous man at the moment?
Yeah, I'm blessed to have the opportunities that my people have fought for me to have and be in the position I'm in, but that's not the narrative and experience for a lot of Indigenous men and women around our country right now. Like, if the Kimberley regions were recognised as a country, they would have the highest suicide rate in the world. Like, a mining company has just blown up a 46,000-year-old sacred site. We have media typecasting and stereotyping what our identity is and what we should be. And with that, systemic racism is alive. It exists. And myself and many others have had to deal with that. And people have been sharing their stories on my Facebook page of, you know, how they feel about that. You know, like last week we had our sorry day, but, you know, sorry means don't do it again or continue to do it. And our children are being removed at a far higher rate than peak of stolen generations. You know, our people are hurt, and our ancestors didn't fight for us to be silent about that.
Sounds like you're frustrated, Jacob. Is that how you describe it?
I'm definitely frustrated, especially in the events that have occurred in the last week. Social change shouldn't have to be spoken about or in an instant of a man's life being taken away.
When you see the events in the United States right now, what do you make of it? How do you feel?
There's a lot of emotions about it, you know, like their story we have here. You know, a government maintains its hold on our communities by forcing them in situations where we feel we have to survive. We've had to witness a televised event called murder, and the citizens have had to watch the last remaining breath of a man. You know, like, you can come home safely and turn on the news, but then there's like a turnaround, especially over there, because there's been so many cases in the last month of it happening again, and you can sense a revolution and a rebellion. And you have so-called leaders forcing their control of the shoot-to-kill mentality, when a month earlier people were protesting with firearms because they didn't want to wear a mask and keep communities safe. You know, communities are protesting and have every right to feel angry about a system that's been built upon oppression and continually, you know, failed them. But yet in our own country, since 1991 Royal Commission, we've had 400 deaths in custody without a single conviction, and it's ignored. Like, you have the Today Show sending in reporters saying that doesn't happen here, but yet we know it happens here. Like, you can't blow smoke in our people's eyes. You can't put concrete on the country because we still know that it doesn't erase the bloodshed from Black or First Nations people. We as people have the power to liberate communities. So, like, what moral choices will you make to determine a better future for those in Black communities and our children? Like, ignorance isn't bliss, it's a choice. We will make mistakes, but no longer will, like, ignorance be tolerated. Like, knowledge isn't power, knowledge is responsibility. So if we know better, it's time to be better as people.
So, Jacob, if you were to talk to someone who says, it's just me, I lead a very small life, I don't have the power of someone like the Prime Minister, what would you say to them? Can they actually bring about change?
Of course we can. Like, reconciliation, to talk about that, means the restoration of friendly relations. And we all have that power to play when it comes to reconciliation. You know, talking about collectively building our relationships and communities that value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, history, cultures. I hope of this one day, but I've heard way too many and experienced way too many examples of it not happening. the expectation, like through this week, is for Indigenous people to reconcile this relationship with Australia, but it only perpetrates the abuser dynamics that we're trying to dismantle. You know, like there's so much quantitative and qualitative data that the governments have around organisations and individuals, and they want change, and they say they want change, but they're not willing to be that change. You know, democracy is derived of the meaning people power. Our own elected leaders are employed by the people for the people and maintain positions of power, and we've seen these people in power and gatekeeper positions discriminate openly. But we as a people put them in that role of leadership, but we concede and accept whatever will be will be. We as a society have too many people not wanting to be uncomfortable and not holding politicians in those gatekeeper positions accountable for their actions. And of course this narrative is tough to talk about, but we just want people to walk with us. We can't have you be the voice with us, but if you walk with us, we can make a better change and change the policies and procedures that are the cause of hurt and anger. So if you love someone that experiences inequality or justice, your love doesn't mean anything if you won't walk beside us in these times of need with our communities. What's happening in the US and here, we need to work together because it is happening.
Hey Jacob, let's make it happen. A future where we all walk together. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your point of view with us today.
No worries. Thank you, guys.
That's Jacob Ridgway, singer, songwriter from Port Stephens. He's a Warumpi and Gamilaroi man, and incredibly passionate, of course. For more on what you can do, what you can say, what you can read, which is an interesting way of educating yourself and making sure you know what you can do, head to abc.net.au/walking-together.
Reconciliation.org.au, another great resource too, and a place you should go, well, today, the final day of Reconciliation Week, but at any time.
Protesters in Australia have joined calls from around the world seeking justice for George Floyd. Those at a Perth gathering last night did so peacefully. They wanted to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, but also they want recognition for the high rates of Indigenous deaths in custody here. Our reporter, Bridget Fitzgerald, was there.
Hundreds have gathered here in Perth for a peaceful rally on this Monday evening. They're joining protesters around the world who've taken to the streets following the death of unarmed black man George Floyd after he was detained by police in Minneapolis. But this rally isn't just about racism in the US. Amid the chants of Black Lives Matter are calls for recognition of the disproportionately high rates of Indigenous Australians in prison and deaths in custody.
Because it's not just happening in the United States, it's happening in Australia, and it's not as talked about, so we want to bring light to it as much as we can.
There was heaps of people that came along, supported us black people, and there was a lot of tears in that. Or us black people, we get treated differently to other skin colour, and different races.
Racism is very much relevant. It's a real thing, it's happening, and that's why everyone is out here tonight.
Noongar elder Ben Taylor says Indigenous Australians feel solidarity with those protesting in the US.
We identify strongly with American and African American because we've been through the same thing, and they're angry over there, so are we. I look at it all day and night on the TV, and I can see where they're coming from.
It's really brought to light what Black and Indigenous people are experiencing around the world.
Dr Hannah McGlade is a Senior Indigenous Research Fellow at Curtin University and a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues.
These are all very live issues in Australia where, Aboriginal people's lives are unsafe and people are dying at the hands of police. This is a real issue here, and we haven't been facing it. We haven't been having the proper conversations. We have too much focus on reconciliation and resistance to actually naming up racism.
According to the Australian Law Reform Commission, the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in prison is a growing and persistent problem. Indigenous men are 14.7 times more likely to be imprisoned than non-Indigenous men, while Indigenous women are 21.2 times more likely than non-Indigenous women. The Commission produced a report into Indigenous incarceration, which was tabled by the Federal Parliament in 2018, but recommendations have largely been ignored.
We don't need to turn to America to see what racism and heavy-handed policing and what a broken criminal justice system looks like.
Sophie Trevett is the Executive Officer of Change the Record, a national Aboriginal-led justice coalition. She says Australia needs to properly address the problem of Indigenous incarceration.
Aboriginal people in Australia are put into prisons at the highest rate in the world. That's extraordinary and should be a source of great shame right around the country. Aboriginal people are incarcerated largely for very minor offending and offending that it's linked to poverty. So you have people being thrown into prison cells because of an inability to pay back a fine. That's not a decent thing for a society to do to anybody.
There are more Black Lives Matter rallies planned for cities around Australia in coming days.
Bridget Fitzgerald reporting. You're listening to AM and it's 8:13.
Okay, thank you everyone for watching. Hope you got through all that okay and it wasn't too traumatic. But I think my point would be that the song that I selected for question 2 and talk about how that song relates to issues and bring it into a current day context as well as draw on other information. You can hopefully, I would imagine, see the relevance of all the reporting over the last week, particularly in relation to the song from 1980 around the experience being all too common of being incarcerated, going into jail, getting out of jail, and looking at the events from today. We're still talking about the same sort of stuff, the high rate of incarceration, heavy-handedness, mistreatment, poverty, and all these other contributing factors that in the end lead to an over-representation of Aboriginal people in the lock-up and justice systems in Australia, and again the all too common and also experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander deaths in custody that still has not been addressed fully or appropriately, with a lot of the recommendations from the Royal Commission into that investigation from 30 years ago still not being enacted, and we're seeing the results today of that. And I guess the broader social issues of inequality as a contributing factor as well. So thanks for your time. Hopefully, you've had a good day. Get through this little video, and we'll chat again after this. Toodle pips.